Every few years, the same photographs go viral. Enormous human skeletons, twice the size of the men digging them out of the ground, their giant skulls grinning up at the camera. And underneath, always the same claim. The Smithsonian found thousands of these, and then they hid them. Buried the bones, buried the truth, because real giants would rewrite everything we think we know about the human past. It is one of the most shared mysteries on the internet, and every single one of those photographs is fake. But here is what makes this story worth your time. Because once you clear away the hoax, you run into something you were not expecting. The Bible really is full of giants, real ones, named and described in detail. And when you look closely at the evidence, the true story turns out to be far stranger than the fake one. Starting with the fact that the most famous giant who ever lived has quietly been shrinking. So let's bury the fakes first. The viral story about the Smithsonian, the one about thousands of giant skeletons destroyed in a cover-up, has a very specific origin. It came from an article published in 2014 on a website called World News Daily Report. And that site is a satire site. It invents fake stories for entertainment. There was no cover-up because there was no discovery. Reuters, the Associated Press, and Snopes all traced the claim back to the same fictional source. And the photographs? Some are digitally edited. At least one famous image came from a Photoshop contest, where the entire point was to fake exactly this kind of picture. The rest are older tricks. Back in 1869, a 10-foot stone man was dug up on a farm in New York and shown to paying crowds as a petrified giant. It was called the Cardiff Giant, and it was a carved block of gypsum, buried on purpose as a hoax. For generations, traveling showmen passed off oversized bones as the remains of giants, when many were simply the fossils of extinct animals, mammoths and mastodons, misread by people who had never seen such creatures. In 1934, an anthropologist at the Smithsonian went through the claims and found nothing behind them. No race of giants, just mistakes and lies, and the very human hunger to believe. So the cover-up is a fantasy. But now the real question. Why does the Bible, one of the most studied texts on earth, insist so plainly that giants were real? Because it does, again and again. It speaks of the Nephilim, a mysterious group from before the flood. It names whole peoples, the Rephaim and the Anakim, described as towering and terrifying. It remembers a king named Og and records a single haunting detail about him, that his bed was made of iron and more than 13 feet long. Though even there, scholars debate what the number meant. A literal bed, a great stone tomb, or the kind of grand exaggeration ancient writers loved to attach to a fallen enemy. And then, of course, the text gives us the most famous giant in all of history, Goliath, the Philistine champion, 9 feet tall, cut down by a shepherd boy with a sling. Except, was he 9 feet tall? Because this is where it gets interesting. The height. Everyone knows comes from the Masoretic text, the standard Hebrew Bible, which says Goliath stood 6 cubits and a span. Do the math, and that is roughly 9 feet, 9 inches. A true monster. But the Masoretic text is not our oldest copy of this passage. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the ancient manuscripts we have looked at before on this channel, there is a copy of the Book of Samuel about 1,000 years older than the standard Hebrew text. And it does not say 6 cubits, it says 4. So does the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation, also far older than the Masoretic version. 4 cubits and a span, which works out not to 9 feet, 9 inches, but to about 6 feet, 9 inches. Now think about what that means. Our two oldest witnesses to this passage, separated from the later version by roughly 1,000 years, both describe a smaller Goliath. Many textual scholars consider the shorter reading more likely to be the original. So how did Goliath grow 3 feet? We do not know. Somewhere in the long history of copying this story, 2 different readings emerged. Whether the larger number came from a scribal error, a different textual tradition, or a deliberate heightening of a legendary enemy, no one can say for certain. But the oldest surviving witnesses preserve the smaller man, and even that smaller man is striking. 6 feet, 9 inches, in an age when the average man stood well under 5.5 feet, would have loomed over any battlefield. But he is a tall human being, not a creature from another world. And tall human beings, genuinely enormous ones, are real. You do not have to imagine them. The tallest man in recorded history, Robert Wadlow, was measured at 8 feet, 11 inches before his death in the 20th century. Nearly 9 feet, standing in living memory, in photographs you can look at right now. His height came from a condition called pituitary gigantism, a small tumor on a gland in the brain flooding the body with growth hormone. It is rare, and it is medical, but it is real. There is even a medical footnote to Goliath himself. Some researchers have proposed that a giant like him, if he existed, could point to the very same kind of condition, a tumor driving abnormal growth. A few have gone further, noting that such tumors can press on the nerves behind the eyes and weaken vision. And they have wondered aloud whether that is why a towering warrior never saw a small stone coming. It is speculation, not proof. But it is a reminder that the distance between a biblical giant and a real medical case may be far thinner than the hoaxers ever imagined. Which leaves the strangest word of all, Nephilim. We translate it as giants, but even that is debated. The meaning of the Hebrew word itself is uncertain. It has often been connected with the Hebrew verb to fall, giving rise to interpretations like the fallen ones, though scholars continue to argue about its origin. What we do know is that the ancient Greek translators rendered it as gigantes, giants, and that this translation helped shape the image later readers inherited. Whether the original writers meant men of unusual size, or men of unusual power, or something else we have lost entirely, is still an open question. We inherited a picture of monsters. The text may have been describing something we no longer fully understand. So where does that leave us? The viral skeletons are fakes, stitched together from satire, Photoshop, and old carnival tricks. There is no buried race of giants, and no Smithsonian conspiracy keeping them from you. But the giants of the text do not simply vanish either. Behind them sits a real world. A Goliath who was most likely a powerful man of about 6 feet 9, rather than a 10-foot titan. A medical condition that produces genuine 9-foot men. And an ancient word that still refuses to sit still. The fake version hands you a monster and a cover-up. The real version hands you something better. A famous giant who shrinks the closer you get to the oldest page. A rare condition that builds real giants in hospital records. And a word we are still not sure how to read. So here is my question for you. When the oldest manuscripts describe a smaller giant than the one we all grew up with, which Goliath is the real one? The towering legend, or the tall man hidden in the older text? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if you like the ones where we pull the history out of the hoax, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.